Hi, I'm Pastor Katie, and this is our new podcast for Asbury United Methodist Church called Beyond Sunday. In this podcast, you're going to be hearing about things happening at Asbury United Methodist Church, learning more about ways that you can get involved in the missions and ministries that we have. You're going to be introduced to people who work here, people who volunteer here, people who worship here, and hopefully you will be inspired to live a Christian life beyond Sunday. For this first episode, I thought maybe the best thing to do would be to start with getting to know your new pastor just a little bit better. I'm not going to take a lot of time in our worship together because the focus of worship shouldn't be on a person like me, but rather on our time together in the presence of God. And so I thought this might be a good avenue to hear a little bit more about my story and who I am, in hopes that it helps you to understand me and feel like you get to know me just a little bit better. And so I'm going to just apologize in advance for if you're not interested in knowing more about me, that's okay. That's what this episode is going to be. So I come from Arlington, South Dakota. I'm a South Dakota girl, born and raised. I grew up there. I was an Arlington Cardinal. I grew up as a Lutheran, actually, ELCA, Evangelical Lutheran Church of America. Baptized and confirmed in that church, and very grateful for that upbringing. But when I was in high school, started to be the kid who asked a lot of questions. I think I was maybe a thorn in my pastor's side just a little bit. I remember even in confirmation asking questions that didn't quite make sense to me. And so had already started to kind of explore the idea that maybe I wouldn't stay in the Lutheran church. And so during that time, the Methodist church in my hometown had kind of a very active youth group and very active in particular contemporary music, which was a new thing for me. And so I kind of got involved there. Through that, decided to go to the University of Sioux Falls, and also in the summers worked at Lake Poinsett Camp. It was through my summers at Lake Poinsett Camp that I got to meet quite a few Methodists, including some people who I now consider to be my friends. I worked out at Lake Poinsett for 5 summers, starting the day after I graduated from high school through the summer following my college graduation. So in the summers, I would be at Lake Poinsett working on staff, doing things from running the camp store, lifeguarding, running waterfront, making campfires, taking photos, all the things. And then in the school year, I was at USF studying theology and philosophy. So I was right here in Sioux Falls, not too far away from Asbury. In fact, I actually went to Asbury for a little bit while I was in college. I found my way here because there were so many people in this church that I knew from camp. So it's been a really cool thing to come back in that way. While I was in college, I had the blessing of getting to study abroad at Oxford University. I got my first real taste of the world beyond our country and beyond South Dakota. And really, really loved it. And so after USF, my plans were really to go on to get a doctorate at some point and perhaps teach theology or teach church history. Those were the kind of subjects that I really was the most interested in. And I was really pursuing the question of why do we have all these churches, and what differences are there, and where did they come from? How did they come to be? That was just always a question on my mind, and wanting to make sense of that and to still figure out where I belonged. I didn't know. I had grown up in the Lutheran church. I was with Methodists in the summer and Baptists in the school year. And I hadn't found my place. So I went after graduation at USF. I moved out to Massachusetts and did my Master of Arts in Theology degree at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary just north of Boston. So I spent 2 years out there, and I spent a summer in between those 2 years living in the North Shore area, Cape Anne is what it was called. If you've ever seen the movie The Proposal, they actually filmed that movie in kind of, I've been to a lot of the places that stood in for Alaska. I hate to break that bubble for you. They didn't film the Alaska parts in Alaska, they filmed them in Massachusetts. Uh, so at that time, my plan was to still very much be a professor. That was kind of my stepping stone between my undergrad and a doctoral degree. But of course, I was broke, I ran out of money, and I was growing disillusioned with the idea of the academy. I just felt like maybe it wasn't the right fit for me, but I wasn't sure what to do with myself. So I moved home after graduating out there, back to South Dakota. Um, and my father, who at the time sold and serviced fire extinguishers and hood systems for Hyman Fire Equipment, fun fact, Hyman's business location is actually at the Crooks exit, and so I drive past it every day. Um, and he traveled through eastern South Dakota and western Minnesota for his job, and he's a very chatty guy, and he was up in Milbank, South Dakota, visiting with a lady who was the head of a nursing home. And she had been from Arlington previously, so she was asking about his family, and he was telling her about how he had this daughter who just finished seminary and needed to find a job. And she just so happened to be the head of SPR at her church, which was a Methodist church. And they were looking for a youth pastor. And I have to say, I am not the typical candidate for youth ministry. I was young and I was single, but I was also very much in my head and very much introverted and very much not the kid who even connected well with teenagers when I was one. And so, but I needed a job, and this felt very fortuitous. And so I went through that application process, and they did hire me. And so I spent 3 years in Milbank serving as a full-time youth pastor on staff at Milbank Central. And it was a really incredible time. One, it was just a lot of fun. Youth ministry can be a lot of fun, but I also was learning a lot. At that point, I decided to join the United Methodist Church. Felt very much like this was my home. And so I was really grateful for that. And then 2 years into ministry there, well, about a year into ministry, one of my students was diagnosed with leukemia. He was 15 years old, and it was a type of leukemia that most people go into remission for, and he never did. And he passed away during my time there. And going through that experience with the community and with the church and with the youth group was incredibly impactful for me. It was one of those moments of these, what you feel are these unimaginable moments that God was speaking to me, saying, this is the kind of thing I want you to be doing and showing up for. The summer after my second year, I attended a lot of church camps. I love camp. Obviously, I had worked at Lake Ponset, but then I was coming back at that season of my life as a camp counselor a lot. And I was at LTC, our leadership training camp, and that year the theme was about God's call, which I felt was a little unfair, I'll be honest. And I remember there was a chapel service where they handed us like Post-it notes, and they said, what do you believe that God is calling you to do? What is God asking of you? And it was a very, reflective, pensive sort of moment. And then you were supposed to write down on your Post-it note what you were supposed to do, and then go put it up in the front of the chapel. And then that started Silent Night, which was a tradition of that camp, and nobody talked again until the morning. I remember sitting in the back of that chapel, and I just started crying because I knew. I had known for a while what God was asking of me, which was to be a pastor. And I didn't think I could do it. I didn't think that I was a good candidate for it. And I really, truly believed that if I answered the call into ministry, I was giving up other dreams in my life. And in particular, I thought the dream to be married and to have kids and to have you know, a life and a career that was my own choosing, and it really felt to me like I was being asked to sacrifice all of those things to say yes to this. But I also felt like the time had come where I needed to say yes. And I remember Becky Holton was sitting near me at the time. She was the director of camping ministry for the Dakotas conference. And I remember she just kind of putting her arm on me and on my shoulder. And at the end of that camp week, I went home and told my parents that I really felt that God was calling me into ministry. And their response to me at that point was, it's about time you figured that out. So it feels like probably most people in my life knew long before I did, or at least long before I was willing and ready to admit it. And so I stayed at Milbank one more year as I discerned where to go to receive my MDiv, where I ended up at Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary in Chicago, which is one of our United Methodist seminaries. I spent 2 years there. I got to transfer in some of my credits from my previous master's degree, and so I finished my MDiv in 2 years. Loved my time there, and then came back and was commissioned in the Dakotas Conference in 2014. And so that's been 12 years ago already, which is crazy to me. My first appointment was in Mitchell as an associate pastor at the Mitchell First Church. I think they call it downtown Mitchell Downtown First Church or something like that. They didn't use downtown in the name when I was there. But I spent 2 years there as the associate pastor, preaching and leading youth and confirmation and just learning all I could about ministry in kind of a bigger church setting. And it was during that time that I met Jason. It's kind of funny because as I mentioned, I really believed at the time that I accepted the calling to pursue pastoral ministry, that it meant sacrificing having a family of my own. And I had kind of just believed that my life would be, my family would be the church. But at the end of 2014, so very shortly after I was in my first appointment, I met Jason, and I think we were dating by the beginning of 2015 and engaged by the end of that year, and married in the middle of the next year. So we've been married 10 years now, but it was one of those things that it felt like saying yes to God helped to make other things to fall in place. After Mitchell, I went to Beersford Zion United Methodist, and started there right after I got married. So that was Jason and my first home together. And I was there for 4 years as a solo pastor, and just loved my time in that church. We had our 2 boys while we were serving there, and just a really great experience. And then from Beersford, we moved in 2020 to Yankton so I could serve as the pastor of Yankton First United Methodist. I wouldn't recommend moving during a pandemic. So my last pastoral transition was a very interesting one and very unusual. And so it's been a real blessing and joy as I've gotten to meet people here, that I get to see your whole face, and that I get to see this church in action. That was one of the really tough things about transitioning in ministry during a pandemic, is everything was kind of on hiatus, and it was really hard to get a sense of the church in that way. So it's been such a joy to my heart to get to have a sense of this church right away. But we spent 6 years in Yankton. During that time, we added to our family, so we now have Abigail as well. And my kids are now, Ben is 8, almost 9, Ethan is 7, and Abigail is 4. And my husband, he is a software architect, and so he works from home, which is great for an itinerant pastor, because no matter where I'm called, as long as there's internet, he is able to work. And that's been such a blessing. Makes our lives a little bit more flexible, and I'm so grateful for it. We also have a cat and a dog. We have May, who is our kitten, and we've had her about a year. We got her from the Humane Society. And then we've had Tyson the dog for a little less than a year. He was needed to be rehomed from his previous owner and has found a home with us. If you love pugs, we would love to have you come meet him. He loves new people. He's very excited. Um, but that's just a little bit about kind of my background and my history. I would say, my greatest joys in ministry are getting to walk alongside people, and I love, love, love going deep with people in topics of faith. I am someone who believes that questions lead us deeper into faith and deeper. The more that we can engage our minds and our hearts and our hands, and it all matters. And so I'm never afraid of when people have questions or doubts or um, want to wrestle with something. I'm your girl. Like that's the kind of things that bring me great joy. I also love the time in worship together, and I love all kinds of styles of worship. I think there's really beauty and diversity in that way, and so I'm looking forward to getting to do that with all of you and be a part of that. I really believe in that worship is something that we do together. It's not a spectator sport. That none of the church is meant to be. We are the church together, not me, but all of us together, and so. One of the things I hope is that we can reflect in our worship and in who we are, an authenticity of being open and welcoming and inclusive, not only to those who have yet to become part of us, but also for all of those who are here, that all voices are heard and that all people feel valued and loved by God, because I believe that all people are. So that is my hope there. What else would be helpful to know about me? Some of you have already, you've heard the interview, hopefully, video that I did with Pastor Kip. Some kind of maybe sillier things to know about me. I don't eat mayonnaise or mustard or mint, which I'm just realizing now they all start with M, which is interesting. I have a interesting talent, skill probably, in that I learned how to say I broke my leg in some languages. So you could ask me about that. I play a few instruments, but none of them well. So you might see me do some of those kind of things periodically. Yeah, I'm just mostly I love to read. When they were asking me about the church office, one of the things I said is, please make sure you have plenty of bookshelves because I have a lot of books. I have a lot of books. I love books. I love reading. I love listening to books. I'm just always curious about the world, about what's going on, and I always know that there's more to learn, and so that's something that I really love doing. But I hope to use again this podcast to be an opportunity to go deeper, to help you understand more about who we are as Asbury, especially as I learn myself. So some of this will be self-serving, and that there's so much for me to learn. And my guess is if you're in the pews or you're watching this or you've been watching online, that there's probably things about this church that you didn't know either. And so I'm hoping that this podcast helps us again to stretch beyond just worship and get a sense of what life is like as a Christian who is part of the church at Asbury United Methodist. And what does that mean? And what does and how being a part of this faith community helps us encounter Christ and transform not only our own hearts and minds, but the world around us. And so I hope that you will continue to tune in, and we'll see you next time. God bless.